The discussion this morning is something that I hope you're deeply interested in, and you can express that deep interest by being actively engaged. We have Slido, we have the old-fashioned raise your hand in the air. We want to make sure that we have conversation and dialogue. The intent is for us to try and explore some important issues and to keep an ongoing dialogue so that we can find out, first of all, what's on your mind, and secondly, how can we continue to build cool companies that might be contributors to an important problem. At SGInnovate, our entire purpose is to try and invest in and be useful to the scientist entrepreneurs. So that's why we use the expression deep tech. We don't think of it as purely AI or purely med tech. It's things that have science at the core and are expressed through engineering. Our goal is to try and put Singapore right in the middle of building globally relevant companies in a particular niche, a space, right? We're not trying to build e-commerce platforms and so on, because there's lots of cool people that are doing that and lots of friends in the ecosystem. But today, we're talking about this whole idea of artificial intelligence, future of employment, how do we think about education? So I don't want us to be limited purely to the title. We'd like to see what we can talk about. And so we've got some really cool people that are here with us. We've got Jake, of course, founder of General Assembly, Nicole, a senior leader within Deloitte. And our goal is to have them share their perspective and also for you to have a chance to inquire and quiz and grill and explore, because it's not our goal to ask soft questions like, is training important? We want to try and talk about things that you think are real. Will AI truly be a job killer and a society breaker? I'm kind of on the side of that as yes. And I think it's important to be honest in these things as opposed to trying to nuance around the question. So let's get straight into it. Normally we do a jump up and a photo, but my friend Jake is not a terribly big fan of that, so I'm going to try and save Jake that because he's been in lots of other photos already. So what I'll do is I'm going to do it. So now, all right, so everybody, can you just stand up for a second, please? Jin's, come on in. Everybody jump up, please. We're just going to have a quick, pretend like you're waving at the camera, whatever you want to do. We're going to do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and that's about how long it takes.
One more. 1, 2, 3. And a fun shot, everyone. Raise your hands. Thumbs up. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, thank you.
That's it. That's all it was. Okay, we're going to go ahead and call Jake and Nicole on up to the stage. So everybody, welcome Jake and Nicole.
All right, that wasn't too bad.
Okay, what I'm going to do is just start off by asking the two leaders to self-intro. Then they'll say whatever it is they'd like to say. Maybe share a little bit about who you are and one or two things that you might believe in, and then we'll get straight into some questions. Jake, over to you.
All right. Well, I'm Jake. I am the co-founder and CEO of General Assembly. We are trying to close the skills gap around the world by giving access to opportunities and education and networks that give people the chance to participate in the 21st century economy. We have 22 campuses around the world, and of course an online presence as well. We've had over 70,000 alumni of 3-month upskilling and reskilling programs to date, which I like to point out is a larger alumni network than all of Harvard Business School's living alumni. And and we also work with about a third of the Fortune 500, helping them build upskilling and reskilling programs to make sure that they are taking control of their talent pipeline issues that they almost all have.
Good morning, everybody. Wonderful to see so many smiling faces. Excellent to be here. So I'm Nick Scober-Williams. I have the great privilege of leading our Global Future of Work Centre of Excellence for Deloitte. Our Centre of Excellence is a part of a 3-year collaboration between Deloitte globally and the Singapore government, focusing on helping individuals, business and government navigate the unprecedented opportunities and challenges that we're all surrounded with in today's new world of work. And one thing I would say, just to put you on notice, I'm always very conscious that the future of work impacts me and my world and what I'm thinking about, what I'm talking about in many different ways. So even though yes, my role leading our Centre of Excellence is the core of my daily existence professionally. I'm the mother of an 18-year-old who is studying law and international business. So the future of work means many different things to me. As a mother, I feel a complete novice and completely lost. And then I'm also in the tail end of completing my own law degree. So as a student at law, when I'm thinking about what this new digital age is all about, as a student at law, it means very different things to me again. And I'd encourage all of you this morning to engage in the conversation as who you are completely, not just your professional self, but everything that makes you who you are. I know we spend a lot of time talking with clients, and nothing silences the room quickly the way that it does when I say, let's think about your children. What's your legacy? What does this mean to them? So I'd really invite you to think more broadly, not just about the here and now professionally, but really enter this conversation with everything that you are.
Okay, thank you. Here's how I'd like to start. There was lots and lots of coverage over the weekend between DPM Heng and PM and many other leaders talking about, in no particular order, the words skills, transformation, future, training, companies, unions, and so on. And so when we think about this issue, one of the things that I struggle with is the idea of being future ready, because I'm surely not in a position to know what the future looks like in any particular way. So this idea that we are training to be future ready, I struggle with intellectually. So Jake, you see people from all walks of life that are trying to repurpose themselves, give themselves new tools and skills to be relevant. Sometimes it's harder than others. Is there such a thing as being future ready, or can we only sort of do our best for what we can see in the more near term?
Well, in some ways, that was one of the key insights that drove the approach that GA took, which is to do, well, let's look at the alternative. What we've existed in is a world for a very long time where the expectation is you go to university, spend a lot of time, sometimes a lot of money, and the idea is you do that because it's an investment in your future that is going to amortize over some insanely long period of time, like 30 years. Like, you'll be glad you did this in 10 years, 20 years. And what's funny is and they talk about it as an investment, but the funny thing is, like, in the world of investments, if you talked about in terms of, well, in 20 years you'll see a return, like almost every business person on the planet would say, get out of here. Like, that's not the world I live in. And so, and I think that is the fallacy, that we can ever do something in any moment in time that covers the next decade or more is a little crazy, right? It's just not tethered to reality. And so what we intended to say is, well, let's think about it as a return on investment. What is a return on investment? It's a return, a numerator, over an investment, which is the denominator, right? And our theory was, can we reduce the denominator? Can we reduce the time, the opportunity cost, and the actual cost of getting both skills and an on-ramp to the next career, and make the return, by doing that, make the return so near-term and relevant, right, that you can see in the next year that you'll get your money back. And that's really how we design our programs. We design our programs to have a year payback period, max. And our vision is, why should you have to count or do this on faith? You should be able to touch and feel it. And so, in many ways, why is that? That's because we don't know what the jobs in 10 and 20 years are going to be. And even if you do know them, you'll probably still get something wrong. I think there's another business quote that I love that I think really applies to this, which is, Warren Buffett loves to say, and he really is talking about the fallacy of over-modeling things, right? Is to say, I'd much rather be generally correct than precisely wrong. And I see that sort of mistake happening all over the place, where, a way a company might think about their future of work is literally taking in all the granular data and trying to subdivide individuals into their skilled components and and look at jobs by their skill components and create this really complex tree of knowledge, right? And then hope with big data science kind of techniques, they'll sort of uncover what their organization needs in the future. And the reality is it doesn't need to be that complex. At the end of the day, what are the things that are true? Well, technology seems to be encroaching more and more and more. Okay, great. What does technology mean? Well, technology means, in a lot of ways, there's a software layer, like programmatic thinking, like understanding how you build and operate in that environment. There's a huge trend that I believe will probably be the biggest trend around data-driven decisions, and how you talk about data, how you deal with data, how you process data, how you use data to make better experiences for your customers, and all of that just comes down to data. Do we know what the title is going to be of the job in 10 years? No. When we started GA, the concept was called big data. Then it was called machine learning about 3 years later, and now every company has switched over to calling it AI. Now, at its core, they're all talking about the same thing. And if you get to an expert, there's a lot of nuances to these terms. But what happens is when it gets into the mainstream, it completely gets kind of corrupted into this like big mush of stuff. And so we've taken the attitude, well, look, we don't know what those jobs are going to be, but we know data is going to be really important. So as long as you're investing in general data facility, which might include spending time in specifics, because you have to be able to do something, you're probably going to be okay. If you can spend time learning how software works for the foreseeable future, you're probably going to be okay. There's a whole human side of this, which is how do we then take this technology and use it as tools to create experiences, stories, products, right, that actually people want to use, right? And how do we make that better? That becomes what we call at GA UX design, but it's a whole host of basically processes and approaches that help groups of people come to better conclusions about what they need to build and how they're going to build it. So this is the way we approach this, and there really are general trends. It's not, the more precise you get, the more wrong you're going to be.
Let me pick up on, Nicole, let me pick up on something that Jake was talking about. Jake's equipping, in some cases, individual men and women for a variety of capabilities. You're looking at some of the world's biggest companies wrestling with this idea of not so much how do I remain relevant as an individual, how do I remain relevant as a corporation made up of a lot of individuals. How are corporations wrestling with this concept of, on the one hand, automation can mean fewer people. On the other hand, I need people to be encouraged and motivated and want to be a part of my company. How do you see companies wrestling with this issue?
So I think there's a couple of elements here. I completely agree with all of those observations and comments that Jake's made at the personal level. And at the personal level, whether I'm talking to my 18-year-old son or whether I'm talking to the CEO of one of the biggest, multinational corporations, my message is very similar in terms of the reality is data, AI-powered world is here. We need data fluency. We need all those type of digital skills, design thinking, those kind of things. However, I think my biggest message to both, before I deep dive into the organisations, is that the most important thing is thinking about how do we learn how to learn and how do we learn how to unlearn. Because we know that skills today are only remaining relevant for as little as 2 years in some times. So the most important muscle that we need to build, no matter whether we're talking about ourselves as an individual or organisations, is getting comfortable with how do you adapt, how do you respond, how do you stay relevant. Now, in terms of our big clients, when we're talking about future readiness, we are seeing 3 key shifts that we feel need to be centre stage. So the first one is probably no surprise. We all know speed has become the new currency, and we need to be agile or adaptive by design to be able to respond and operate in today's pace. So whether that means working through, networks of cross-functional teams, purpose-driven, user-centric business missions, you name it. That just has to be a foundation for speed. The second shift that we're seeing is leaders' mindset. The need to develop a founder's mindset. And some of you who may have seen some of our recently published annual global trends research reiterates that leadership capability is the number one issue on the minds of CEOs and organisations today that they're losing sleep over. So if you think about startup founders and that relentless passion, that belief in the big ideas that they've got, and that ability to drive the collective action across the ecosystem to bring the ideas to life, that hyper collaboration, hyper connectivity, that mindset shift, again, has to be an important ingredient in how we respond. And then I think on point two, that the third final one related to the workforce piece is that piece about augmenting and unleashing our workforce. So how do we use automation as an opportunity to create new capacity so we can redirect our focus to the more meaningful, purposeful work, and at the same time tap into the open talent economy so as we get the skills we need at the speed we need to win this race. So I think they're the three key shifts, and then I'd say that they're all wrapped up in what I call the 3 C's. Courage. We've got to create the change. We can't adapt. We've got to drive it. We've got to create it. We need to immerse in that constant reinvention. Be ready, be prepared. We must live in constantly keeping ourselves relevant. And then that sense of community and collaboration across the ecosystem. I think that's, what we are doing with the work we're doing with clients.
Okay, so there's a couple of things in here which I think are really interesting, because I am also a huge believer in the importance of mindset. I've talked about it for a while. And just to put it into context, my basic argument since joining Singapore government 6 and a bit years ago is we have all the inputs, right? Great education, great scientific research, big investable capital, lots of corporations, supportive government. So why aren't we building more amazing world-changing things out of Singapore? Mindset, right? Take a risk, see what happens, it may not work. So Jake, you live in a world, since you are a founder, and you live in this world of trying to drive change, but I'm, again, biased in the sense that I think of people like you in units of one. I mean, there aren't rooms full of people that are willing to take high levels of uncertainty, high levels of risk, and continue to push ahead. Is that something which is teachable? When we talk about skills for the future, and adaptability and nimbleness, it's pretty high stress, and you've lived in that world. So do we focus on a skill, helping somebody be good at something, or do we focus on them as athletes that can be repurposed in this whole idea of mindset? Is that even teachable?
Well, I don't know if those things are opposed, because I think we live in a society that contains multitudes, and I think we have to be okay with that. And the simple reality is like, unlike, there are some special exceptions, like Instagram having like 9 employees when they sold for $1 billion. The reality is every successful company, for every founder that has a big idea and gets it going and rubs 2 sticks together and somehow makes a spark, whether it's just a lucky accident or whatever, it doesn't matter. To actually make it lived up to its potential, you need hundreds, if not thousands, of people to participate in that vision. That's why leadership is so important. And so I think we're talking about, one question is how do we make more founders? And that's something you here at SGInnovate is probably thinking about. And it's a very, very interesting and legitimate thing to be thinking about, I think, if you're in your seat. But if you're thinking from a societal level, right, the way Singapore is thinking about it, or the way that the United States thinks about it, is how do we remain competitive on the global stage to attract and retain the talent, but really as a tool to attract and retain the business activity in our region that allows us to build a really flourishing society that can afford all the things that we want to be able to afford for our citizens. And so those are, you know, we're all at different levels sort of struggling with the same thing. The founder question, I think, in some ways is about, that's about incentives and environment, right? And yes, like, you know, one way to frame it is risk and failure, right? And if you're not willing to take risk and have failure, it's going to be very hard to do something that seems impossible, because everybody's going to be telling you don't do it, and you're going to say okay. For me, being a founder is all about asymmetric upside versus downside, right? The secret is, you know, a lot of the perceived risk, right? Like, I look at all my classmates who I went to business school with, right? A lot of them said, well, great, now I went to school, and now I have to make good on that, right? And whether it's because I got to pay off loans, which a lot of them, you know, a lot of people in American society has to deal with that for like the 5 to 10 to sometimes 20 years after graduation. It's also things like perceived risk, right? What will be my status? What will be my, you know, my ability to sort of to afford the lifestyle I want? Like all of these things. And those are all illusions. Those are all perceived risks to a certain point, right? They are, but that doesn't make them any less real for the individuals. And so I think if you look at the places where innovation has really flourished, there's typically many ingredients, but one of them is an environment of sort of rinse and repeat around trying things and failing at them. Now the challenge with that is when you're a really big organization like a bank, you know, it's funny when I think people go into banks and say, you just got to be able to fail more. Because the problem is, when somebody at a bank fails, you know, you may cost the bank $1 billion and have a lawsuit coming into the entire organization. And so this definition of what is like failure as a good value, it all has to be done at the right scale, right? And I think, and so I think I want to address one more thing, and then sorry, I realize I'm talking too much. So you talk about like skills expiring every 2 years, and I think we have to really be thoughtful about how we talk about skills, okay? Because I think there's fundamental levels of skills and there's very specific skills. And I think one of the things that happens is you're like, yeah, do companies change the software platforms with which they're developing new software every couple years? Absolutely. Has the secret is, at the fundamental level, programming a computer is not that dissimilar than what it was 30 or 40 years ago. It's a little more complex. There's more layers on top of it. It involves more collaboration, maybe more tools, but the fundamental act is not that different. So we're not talking about fundamental skills, we're talking about ways of doing things, right? And that ways of doing things change very, very fast. So what's the right way? And I think part of it is, yes, giving tools for people to have access to that and things like that. But the other thing is to have a little more faith in human beings to be able to figure out more than just what's right in front of them. Like, people aren't just cogs in a machine who know how to do one thing and they're going to do that for 20 years and you're going to have to cajole them to change. People like change. People like novelty and challenge. And I think it's the corporate world that has created this paradigm that ironically now they're scared of and suffering from, of people are just these one units, and if they can't do that one thing, we should just trade them out for another unit. And what's really happening right now is that's become an untenable strategy, because everybody's looking for all the same talent at all the same time. So there's just not enough in the world. And so you actually have to look at that and say, how do we look at this completely different? And the senior leaders have been saying that they worry about leadership for the last 30 years. Nothing's changed about that, right? Everybody, you know why? Because that's all they interact with is leaders, right? They're not actually thinking about the layers below and how the work gets done. And so when we think about this, I think there's all of these different layers, and it's like a layer cake. And I'm not saying leadership isn't a problem. We all want more leaders in our companies. Everybody is hungry for more people who can take more responsibility. That's like a truth, right? But underneath it, for every leader, you need to have 20 people underneath that. And they all need to be able to do stuff and be happy doing it. And those are sort of the core problems.
So let me, okay. First of all, I'm just going to take a straw poll because I'm interested in the context here. So if you believe, I'm just going to do it as a binary, so if you're in the middle, I apologize in advance. AI, and I'll just use the expression generically, so let's not debate what do we mean by, but this idea of AI stroke automation will be a net job eliminator in the years ahead, or a net job creator, because people like to argue, yeah, that might go away, but there'll be these three other things that replace it. So net job eliminator or net job creator. So I'm going to say net job eliminator. Okay? And net job creator. All right, I mean, I need help. Is that sort of a 55%, 45%? I mean, there's a lot of people that are arguing both sides of it, but it looks like generally more people are optimist. And so I think for those that have read Li Kai-Fu's book about the race between China and the United States in AI, his biggest concern is not the idea of AI being deployed for militaristic, Skynet, Terminator type future, but more the idea that it's going to be a really significant societal impact. And one of the questions that's come up here, which I also like, is about UBI, Universal Basic Income. How do we think about this societal disruption? So we can talk about being ready for the future, but it's also truthful to say some people just won't be ready. I mean, it's not logical that every man and woman will be able to make a transition, because it's never been the case. I mean, I came out of a corporate background way back when, and the idea is RIFs, reductions in force, right? You always have efficiency gains and optimizing, and there's all these euphemisms that mean I'd like to try and do X amount of work with fewer people, because that's how corporations improve margin. So automation is a great path to making that even better. How do you think about the societal impact, Nicole? Because you've talked about the whole person being involved.
Yeah.
Corporate leaders are driven by boards of directors and shareholders that want to see enhanced margins and so on, but there is a people aspect. How are the corporations that you're working with thinking about the people?
And I think there's a couple of things here that weave into some of what we've been talking about. I feel that, to your point, we've always assumed that at the board level, if we focus on increasing efficiency, effectiveness, we are driving an innovative strategy. Now, they just have to be hygiene factors and are expected. And what the boards are challenged with is that this is now a game about complete reimagination. We can't keep progressing and achieve what we need to achieve by doing the same. We've got to reimagine. I also feel that one of the reasons, I agree with your comment about leadership's always been on our mind. I think the reason that it has emerged in the last 12 months in our research in a way that it hasn't before is because there's a greater recognition that we've spent the last maybe 5 to 10 years focusing on the technology and trying to get our head around it. And all of a sudden, I think the votes are in. And the votes are saying, despite the extraordinary technology, it is and always will be human potential that drives us forward, and that collective intelligence. So I think that is really hard for us to get around, because we then need to think about, well, where can I and should I apply some of the tech? Because the other thing that is very interesting for me when I'm working with clients is I can walk in and I can say to them, this function, we can automate 90% of it today. Here is the cost reductions. Here is your headcount reduction. This is what it'll do to your bottom line. This is an option. But then I'll say to them, now we need to think about your 3 levers. The work that you need to do, who or how you want to get it done, where you want to get it done, what are your ways of working, and we need to make trade-offs. And what I find is it's the decisions we make about what we do, rather than what we could do, that is making our statement about our values and our culture. And I think that is cutting to the heart of what our big clients are struggling with, because some of our biggest clients, they are, their boards are full of the most intelligent, clever, successful people. And they're saying, have a look at our employee engagement scores. They're at like -60. What are we doing wrong? And this is I'm absolutely honest. What are we doing wrong? And it is a case of saying, well, when you're making these decisions, and the other thing is, being able to focus on the zoom out and the zoom in. Like a couple of months ago, I was in my second meeting with a large conglomerate here in Singapore, and I'd left them in the first meeting with a few things to think about. I went back the second meeting and they said, you're going to be so proud of us, Nick. Amazing. We've now set a KPI. Every business unit must deliver an innovation project in the next 6 months. And I said, wow, that is amazing, team. And this is the C-suite. I said, now help me understand. What's the objective? What have you told them? What does success look like? Have you told some of them you want them to learn or look at reducing costs, others growing in a new market, others just experimenting with new agile ways of working? What actually is the mission here? Blank faces, empty room. And I had to take a breath and remember that I was representing Deloitte. And I had to say, forgive me. And it actually, that particular C-suite was a room of males. And I'd say, forgive me, gentlemen. I really acknowledge the progress you've made in having conversations. But let's be real, progress, 0. Because whatever you're asked them to go and do out there today, is that going to deliver to your business strategy? You don't even know what it is. So I think these are some of the things that are at the heart of how do we get that collective intelligence and be strategic about it.
I want to take this because there's a lot of stuff you can unpack about this automation and job. It is a deep issue, but here's something that you don't hear talked about as much. There is a job that you pointed to that you could automate 90% of. Think about what that means to be a human being doing a job that a robot could do, and you're being asked to do it in its place. How insane is that we're worried about the human being in that context? I'm worried about the human being kept in a job that a robot could do, because how horrible does that job sound? And I think we don't think about this, but the failure of imagination is when we automate things, that means we get freed up to do other things, right? And we always hear that in the version of economists saying, well, at the economic level, we free up society's resources, and then we go over here, and maybe there's some disruption, we have to deal with that. But think about it at the individual, corporate level, right? The beauty about capitalism really is that it is a constant, bloody competition about who can do more for their customers, right? And so my view is, and by the way, this has been the history with IT. It's not like this is the first time, when we brought IBM mainframes into the corporate world, what that meant is there was huge rooms of people who were doing calculations as calculators. They were literally called calculators, who were no longer necessary. That was not an apocalypse, right? And so if we think about now, it's okay, well, what else can we do? If we don't have to spend all our time entering data into a screen and talking to a human being, having the same conversation 100 times a day, what else could we do to make the customer happy, to make our colleagues happier, to make us more productive in ways that actually have end value in the world, right? And so if I look at it and say, yes, are there jobs now that can and will be automated? 100%. But my guess is the next step is the successful companies want to say, great, we freed up all these resources. Now we're going to put those resources to making customers happy, to creating new products, to creating an experience that far away crushes our competition. And then what happens is they succeed and the competition says, oh crap, we got to get caught up. And they tell their board, we're going to have to hire all these people back that we just fired because we automated to be able to match what the competition is doing. And you're already seeing this happening. T-Mobile, which is sort of in the United States, is sort of the number 4 carrier, right? They're sort of struggling in terms of wireless carrier, right? You got AT&T, you got Verizon, they're the big big companies, and they're sort of struggling. They've actually made this decision to go to an entirely human customer service operation when everyone else is going towards like automated bots and all that kind of stuff. My guess and my hypothesis, and they've confirmed this to me when I talk to them, they believe this is because it's going to make it a true competitive advantage in the market, right? And I think competition is what solves a lot of these problems, and this is something that I think we lose in this context. So it's very easy to see the right in front of our face that there's a coming apocalypse. All these people are going to be without jobs. It's much harder to say what happens after that step and then that step and then that step, because that's the world of history that we've lived in for a very long time, and we've been okay to date, more or less.
Yeah, no, all right. I mean, I'm sort of there and sort of not, but I think it's.
How are you not? Let's talk about it.
Because I think, hang on a second, what is that? No, I think the interesting thing is.
No, I'm serious.
What do we want from corporations, right? What we want from corporations, I'm not saying it at societal level, what shareholders want from corporations is ever-expanding margin, right? You invest in a company to be an owner of a future dividend stream or a future capital growth.
No, that's not true.
So
that's okay.
Absolutely true.
What they want is to make money.
So the question then is, if there's going to be a change, which I agree, and I accept that people have to continuously think, it's not obvious to me at least, that you can take somebody who is in accounting whose job has been automated and say, now we need this person to go help us be more creative in delivering and developing products for customers.
Okay, but that's an exaggerated example, and there's a million little iterations of that. I think
that could be the
this
case.
Is where
So
the debate.
I think this is where the important point is. There will be rifts, and I think that's all we're trying to explore in sessions like this. There will be rifts. It's not moving down the river in a smooth
Okay, so
scenario.
let's talk about, okay, I gave the optimist approach.
By the way, be ready with your own questions.
Yes, please do. I gave the optimist approach, and it's true. And I like to do it partly because nobody says those things. So on the flip side, which I also believe is true, is what's happening in this moment is it seems to be happening faster than we've seen in the past. It seems to be it comes more like a rapid tidal wave, right? Not just a slow rising of the tide. And so what that means is the odds of things happening that have a much higher likelihood of causing social disruption are higher than they have been in the past. And we're worried about the social disruption. We're worried about having legions and legions of dispossessed people who feel less bought in to the society that we have because they were victims of this moment in time. And it doesn't mean a damn thing to them if you say, don't worry, the economy's going to take care of itself and in 30 years it'll all be fine. That's not like a happy thought for somebody who's out of work and can't afford to support their family or whatever. And so this is the issue that we have to solve, is but I think there's no way to avoid it. There's only a way through it. And I think there are lots of ways through it that we at GA are in heavy pursuit of. We spend a lot of time coaching companies, I bet you do too, on how to reskill and redeploy people, right? On how to upskill people so they remain relevant. How to even have conversations with their employees about what the future of their job holds and how they can remain both relevant and productive and grow with the company. And I think what we see is in those moments, it's not as hard as people think. Nothing is a panacea. It doesn't solve all the problems. But there are plenty of things to do that make this a lot better and less. But this is where it's about the failure of imagination. And boards who believe that this worked for the last 30 years. We just keep cutting costs, getting productive, squeeze our vendors, manipulate.
I get it. I
right?
understand.
But that's not the only way to do business, right?
Let me go also to you. I mean, I've got questions on Slido, and are there questions that anybody just wants to shout? Yes, please.
Hi. I used to work for Deloitte, actually. And then before Deloitte, I was working for banks in London and Montreal, so I did a lot of efficiency projects, automation, getting rid of headcount and stuff like that. So I think I agree with most of the things that you said. I think from my personal experience, the hardest part was after you've automated a job, you got rid of the headcount because there is a financial incentive. I think what wasn't done so much was upscaling and rescaling the job of that person because there's just no money, there's no time for it. So I think one project I did personally was I've automated some jobs, got rid of headcount, and the person who was doing the job was in the late 40s, and then that person does not know what else to do. And then he got made redundant, and then the bank's responsibility was not to upskill and reskill that person to give that person another job. So I felt like things was done kind of more in a brutal way. It's not my fault, but I think that there was just no time and money, no budget. There was no one who was interested in kind of recreating a job for that person. So my question is, how do you, I guess, question for all of you, how do you change the leader's mindset to allow those people another chance to do something else?
So I think the very first thing that I have to call out is that every other day I see new research about the jobs that can be automated around the world. Continues to increase, it's mind-blowing. My message is always, please don't worry about that. Please focus on the fact that when we look at individual occupations, there are essentially no occupations today that can be completely automated 100%, because the automation is at the individual task level, not at the job level. So I may be able to automate 30% of one person's work, 80% of another person's work, 5% of another person's work. And we need to be working with mindset to explain that. This is not headcount. You still need those 3 people. There is still that 70% of that person's work, 20%. And to your point, focusing on how are we using the automation opportunities to drive competitive strategy. And your example was absolutely brilliant in terms of the way that they're focusing on the experience. So, just a couple of months ago, anybody here work for Facebook? Anyone? Couple of months ago, I had the pleasure of spending time at Facebook, and they couldn't wait to get me up to whatever level it was, and they said, this is our employee drop-in centre, an entire half of a floor, CBD Singapore. It was empty at the time. There were 3 people at the desk, and they said, while everybody else is outsourcing employee benefits and all of these things, we are making it our point of differentiation to be able to provide a drop-in service for our people. So if they want to come and talk about, maybe it's parental leave benefits, maybe it's medical benefits, things they don't want to talk about with their immediate leaders or whatever, we want that to be their point of difference. And so I think we've got to help shift that mindset away from headcount. I mean, there's been some amazing work that we've been doing in Australia with a very big client, and I find this very interesting. When we first started working with them on their AI strategy, 80% of our work was on automation. Now, 80% of our work is on building AI assistants, and only 20% is on automation. Because through the journey, they're making a shift in their strategic choices and realising this isn't just about automating. This is about how do we use AI to augment human capability. So I think that mindset shift is important.
Let me go back out. I've got some questions here, but I want to make sure that we're also real time. So anybody have a question? Yes, please.
Yeah, so my question is about the involvement of unions. So I'm from the north of England, and the coal industry in the north of England was basically taken out, to the earlier point, very brutally. Nobody there ever works again. Yeah. Right? The unions stood up for the rights of the workers. Who's standing up for the rights of the workers in today's society? Because I agree, I don't think corporations will do it. It's not in their interest because they're responsible to shareholders. So where do unions fit in this mix?
What I'm going to do is, because we've got a bunch of, so we'll try and also...
We'll keep it, this is a fraught thing, and I want to be clear, I don't have a ton of experience with unions in general. Now that we're owned by a large multinational, and Europe is much more, it's actually something we're engaging with a lot, because I actually believe it's a huge opportunity. And the unions that do right, the unions that want to really do well by their stakeholders can really actually help participate and drive some of this in the right way. The problem is, you know, it really depends on the imagination and vision of the union leaders, the same way you know, and I think you'll find positive and negative examples in almost every place, because that's the nature of the variance here. I do think, here's a couple ways that workers can and will be protected. And I can use Singapore is a much better example than, say, the United States. So let's start here, right? So Singapore has, when they went out and found General Assembly and brought us to Singapore. That's the first thing. I mean, that's a level of vision. You're like, wow. Second thing is they set it up so that citizens of Singapore, and now permanent residents, can get pretty significant subsidies to come to General Assembly. And if you're over the age of 40, that subsidy increases to almost 90% of the cost of the tuition. Now, why are they doing it, right? They're doing that for two reasons. It's a market-driven approach. I think long-term, they have the two interests that are very well aligned. They know that the ability to find talent and the right skilled talent here is going to be what determines whether the next bank wants to move a headquarters here. And that is how they believe they grow. They also know that they have to take care of their citizens. That's part of their job. They see it as a core part of their mission. And because of that, they know that if people get dispossessed, right, and get laid off at a moment in time where they don't feel like they have a future and they don't believe they have a future, that destabilizes a lot of the things that make Singapore such a great and special place, right? So at a very high level, that's a market solution, right? It's that the forces require you to address this stuff. And my guess is in the United States, you see this in pockets and states, and you know, we have a pretty dysfunctional political environment right now. I don't know if you've heard. And so it's different, right? It's different. But I see that in Europe, I see it in Australia, I see it wherever we are. I see it in the Middle East, right? Which is probably the most remarkable thing, right? And so I do believe that there are ways through this. I think the challenge is, it's one thing to look in aggregate at everybody, right? It's very easy, like when you're talking about specifics and these disruptions and regional workforces that are no longer needed, ravaging communities, I mean, that has a real effect. And I think the real purpose, what government should be doing, is solving those problems. These problems that markets are not going to be fast enough at solving. And who knows? But unions play a role, but they can't make money from thin air either. They can help organize, they can help pressure governments, but it's far better to pressure them to figure out the right reskilling strategy and long-term economic path, not to see if you can squeeze a couple more years out of the coal industry. Yeah, which is what our president suggested.
You know from the headlines that, DPM came out and said those companies that are investing more will get more help from government, this sort of circular approach, and that government intends to work closely with the unions, which is a completely different stance than the combative approach during the coal industry and Thatcher era and so on, when I was at that time living in England. So I think one thing that's come up as a question, and I think is also important for us to make sure that we don't lose sight of, is this idea of individual ownership as well. What is government doing? What is my corporation doing? As opposed to what am I doing to put myself in a position to be flexible and capable and competent. So I think this idea of learning, and universities used to be places where people went to learn, then they sort of morphed into quasi-job training places. I learned how to be an X and you graduated, and I know, Nicole, we were speaking earlier, this idea that very few people actually do what it is that they were in university to learn. The deeper you get into your career, the farther away you get from whatever that was. At least that's in my particular case, and I think in a lot of others. So what is the university meant to be? And how do we think about educating people and helping them? Are they athletes? Or are they very, very specifically specialized in one thing? Let's go back out. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Hi, my name is Prabhu, and picking up on your point, Steve, about individual responsibility. So I think a lot of us are trying to figure out. So I work in I work in biotech, and my background is medical. So, and I'm really interested to figure out what skills do I need, either hard skills or soft skills, right? Both, in order to stay relevant in the future. So I'm wondering whether you could enlighten us on that. If one wants to stay relevant in this era of AI and deep tech and all that, yet still remembering that you're going to be working with people, not robots, for a long time more, what are probably not one, but what are the sort of technical skills maybe, and what are the soft skills that we need to keep learning? And would it be better to do it through one of those, online courses like MOOCs, or is it still a good idea to go to a university and get a part-time degree? I mean, is that still something people look at, or it doesn't matter?
I'll say a couple of things there. I think that in terms of the technical skills, to me, they're just going to be a given, like we were talking about. We know that we're going to continue to be data-driven. Tech is going to continue to be a part of our world, so we're going to need to be able to adjust with that. You've asked my favourite question when you use those words, soft skills and hard skills. Now, I'm probably going to be a little bit controversial here, but I am in the camp that says I truly believe what we used to call soft skills are now our hard skills of today, that are where we drive our individual value. So by that I mean, how do we team? How do we collaborate? How do we get that courage to take risks, rapid experimentation, get resilient in falling over, failing fast, learning quicker, all of those sort of things. And research has shown that, if you look at this notion of collective intelligence with humans working with the machines and robots, the number one skill that immediately increases our value by 50% is persuasive communication, right? And so, when I'm talking to my son, for example, and he's saying, where should I focus on developing myself? All of those skills that I now call the hard skills of today and tomorrow, that is where I would be focusing on, because regardless of what happens with the technology, they are the skills that the machines and robots, at least for the foreseeable future, are going to need to lean on us on to be able to contribute. I don't know whether maybe you gents have got...
I mean, look, so this is sort of a version of the answer I gave a little bit earlier, which is that I think you can divide it up into three simple categories, and this is about as, then you have to get specific about where you are and what the dynamics are, is that I think of it as humans, numbers, and building things. And building things in some ways is just a combination of humans and numbers. If you really reduce it back. And so I think everybody needs to be at some level of competence around all three of those things. The relative mix depends on who you are, what you're naturally good at, what you need to work on to get better at, and where you want to be successful and what's valued in that environment, right? And so no one can tell, this is why individual responsibility matters, is because no one can tell you, and you're going to have to make some bets. Now, in terms of how should you learn this stuff, I think there's no precise thing, because every one of those things at different levels requires different experiences, right? We personally believe the best way to reskill someone in order to enter the field of technology is a pretty immersive experience that requires many hours of learning that is not really conducive to asynchronous online experience that you do in your own time. Because it requires commitment, and frankly, it's hard to have that commitment on your own, is at the core of it. But there are lots of things you should be reading. There's MOOCs I see MOOCs as another form of book, right? YouTube is the world's biggest MOOC. It's amazing, right? But there's also going to be room for mentorship, for asking people, how can I be better? What makes that person good, right? I mean, it's true that the human skills, the soft skills, I mean, you don't have to be that smart. And if you're really good at leading and reading people, you can be very successful. But you can also be very successful by being all deep in the numbers. But you will be most successful if you find ways of combining those things in a way that gives you a unique competitive advantage in your context.
So I think another way that we think of it is we work with lots and lots and lots of scientists. But the challenge for them is sort of back to this earlier point, articulating what they do and why it matters and why someone would want to invest multi-million dollars in that is a very small subset. So if you have a domain expertise that's then complemented by some other competencies. So if you're in healthcare and you know something about analytics, then you're in a very small group. We know lots of people that know analytics, don't know a domain. We know lots of people that know a domain, don't know analytics. So to sort of echo the point, if you're, to use the old T expression, right? I'm super deep in this and I know something about that, then and then if you add the other dimension of, and I know how to articulate it reasonably well, you're in a small group. Lots of software engineers are somewhere on the spectrum. And I came out of a software industry where the greatest software engineers were incapable of making eye contact or having a conversation, but they were amazing. You have somebody that is comfortable with software and can articulate, boy, it's a small group. Let me press on, if I may, just in the interest of taking more. Yes, please.
Recently, I just completed my data science university with GA.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, is this a planted question here? And they were amazing, you say?
Because I've always forward-looking into what possible jobs out there in the future. So for AI, I believe there will be new opportunities and job follows that as well. So right now I'm seeing things that is bits here and there. So what are the opportunities that you are seeing that will be skilled in a very large way in the future?
So are you asking us what specific jobs we think are emerging?
In the industry so far that have a chance of being skilled in a very big way.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think you might be asking. There's a lot of questions I think I heard. I'm not sure, but so one is, what are the big skills of the future? Is that what you're asking?
Related to AI, like for example, self-driving cars.
Sure.
Healthcare.
But this is sort of what I was saying earlier, is that at some level, you have to go a level deeper than that, because at the end of the day, self-driving cars involve a huge amount of different disciplines. Probably the core discipline in self-driving cars is computer vision, which is a subset of machine learning, which is really an extension or a combination of data science and software engineering. Okay? So this is how this works. And they're fundamental disciplines mixed and matched in different ways. Now, there's going to be a lot of people working on those self-driving cars who are not machine learning experts. They're going to be in some other part. There's someone who has to deal with the front-end interfaces of this. There's going to be someone who's going to deal with the UX side of it. There's going to be someone who has to deal with the regulations associated with it. And so if you look, that's why I'm sort of talking about these themes, right? I mean, with data science, you're in a pretty good spot, because what I see is almost every industry is grappling with this huge amount of data that they have, and this massive sort of burgeoning understanding that data is the thing that they have that can make them deliver better experiences and products for their customers at their core.
I think the key would be, think about where those intersections are. So there's lots of people who are fast runners. The question is, do you want to be focusing purely on being a 100-meter track athlete? Do you want to be a marathon runner? Do you want to take the fast running and be a rugby player? So you have to think about how to take that core capability and apply it in a way that complements you. If you know something about legislation around vehicles and you know something around data science, to use the words, then again, you're in a smaller group. There's lots of people, and my daughter's fiance was asking me about this very question. He works in startups in the US, and he's saying, what can I do to be better equipped? My answer is, go learn as much as you can about how to gather, manipulate, interpret data. And then you can play to a competency that suits what you already know. You've just given yourself another area of differentiation. So back to the idea of your healthcare and your data, your transportation and your data. The people that don't do well are the people that show up and say, I'm a data scientist, I can do something amazing. And the answer is, in what area? So healthcare is hungry, transportation is hungry, energy management is hungry. Every single industry, financial, every single industry is hungry. But you have to come back to it and say, and here's what I already know, and I've just made it even stronger with this new set of skills that I've picked up from my friends at General Assembly.
And that's why it might still be good to hang out in an industry for a while and get special expertise. It's also at some level a human thing. Do I know the humans? Do I know how these people think? Do I know what the challenges are? The more you know about those challenges, the more you can use these tools, and that's what data science is. That's what leadership is a tool. I know how to use those tools to drive something special and different. And that's sort of Steve's point. It's perfect.
Next question, please. Yeah, you'll have to forgive me because I know if 3 hands go up, so whoever wants to shout.
One of the probably unforeseen challenges with AI is around the
Okay.
device. In terms of the people creating AI,
Yep.
there is basically enough diversity in those individuals, particularly today. So there's a real big device and do you see this as a real issue or something that will be addressed as, I suppose, the learning capabilities sort of catch up?
It's absolutely a massive issue today. I mean, I've just completed an MIT course, MIT Sloan AI course, and it featured as, you know, the bias, not just in the individuals, but even in the information that the AI systems are having to digest. So people who have written all of the documentation, you know, even just looking at, okay, all of these medical reports have all been written by a male. What does that mean? And so I think right now it is absolutely front of mind as one of the biggest risks in how do we progress the opportunities that AI brings and address. I don't think anyone has got the answers yet, because on the flip side, we also don't want to superficially intervene with what we think that diversity and inclusion formula should look like. Right, so we don't want to artificially say, well, let's change this to a female, this to a male, this to this country or whatever. But I think you're absolutely spot on. The biases from that lack of diversity and inclusion, not just in the individuals interacting with it, but the information it's digesting, I think that's going to continue to be a big, big issue on the agenda.
I think this is huge. I think there's two different elements in it. One is that, and this is top of mind for us, is that just the full representation in data science, right? It's for everyone to talk about learning to code or like, you know, becoming software engineer. Data science, because it's so nascent, because it's so informal, has really drawn the people who were the most informally interested in it for whatever reason, or had access to a chance to play around in their employer on how to do it. But that's not to say there aren't a lot of, it's a pretty diverse group of people who could do that field. And that's one of the things that we like to think that we do at GA, is create accessible on-ramps to make it a more diverse place in a lot of different axes. Data science practices in machine learning and AI has this whole other level of risk, which is that in some ways, like anything involving data, and if you've done anything, you know this, it's garbage in, garbage out. And to the extent that you don't have a representative data set, to the extent that history is a bad guide of what we want to be true, right? It's going to replicate that. And you know, there's always been all these stories about how AI has turned out to be like really racist and like horrible right online and stuff when you let them just run wild. Right, why is that? Well, that's because that's the data that's coming in. And I think that's the final thing, is that there's going to be this uncomfortable moment of these things showing us a mirror of really where we're at as a society. And oftentimes we're not going to like that. It's going to make us really uncomfortable. And that's okay, but it's a whole other layer of this that I think people, you know, the data is not inherently objective because it's data. And I think that's a whole level of the conversation that we're not going to be able to get into here, but it's going to be a big thing.
And algorithms themselves are not inherently biased. So the algos, but it's the data and the quality. And so people talk about, you know, how do we make sure the algorithms are not biased as opposed to the data, and how do they try and deal with it? I want to go to the back here for a little bit. Yes, please.
So I'm Patricia. And when I first started in my career, I had a book that was quite groundbreaking. It's Control Your Destiny or Someone Else Will. And very, very early in my career, my manager at that time impacted me by sharing with me that I'm a leader. And I was very young, I was 20-something, and I said, how can I be a leader when I'm not even a people manager yet? And he was explaining to me that that's not what leadership is about. Leadership is about, you know, the ability to drive change and impact. And so I think that for the younger people today, and when I turned around and looked at the audience, we're not the Gen Ys here, not a lot, maybe Jake is. But honestly, you know, when they are in big multinational companies here, they are actually quite worried about their upskilling. And they can probably smell that it's not going to happen very soon and, attend a course in the company and have a quick ROI within a year, that's probably not going to happen. And I suspect that if they can feel that, they can smell that, they're just going to leave those environments and, go to companies where they can really control their destiny. So we're seeing, and I started in management consulting in my career, we're seeing people like McKinsey's, people, junior partners, really bright, they're like, forget this, I'm just gonna, create something, and just drive that and, make it happen. So my question is, maybe what we need to do, and I'm just remembering my story of what I was shared about being a leader, but maybe it's being the founder, that founder's mindset. Whether it's our children, I don't think, we can wait for companies. I have a kid. I think when she goes into a multinational company, if she wants to, and she doesn't even, she's only 12, and she's already thinking about all those jobs that we don't even see titles, and she's just bouncing off ideas with me. There's not one thought in her mind thinking about, I'm going to join like this great company, and I'm going to have a great career for the next 10 years.
So is there your question? Yeah.
The question is, maybe we need to have more of that founder's mindset. And my question is to the three of you, what are your thoughts around that? Thank you.
Founder's mindset.
I feel like that's your domain. I mean, I can talk about what I believe. Founder's mindset. I mean, we could talk very generically about it, and we're probably all wrong because I think founders come in all shapes and sizes, and I've seen them. And I think this sense of it's really a combination of deeply idealistic and unpragmatic thinking, then wedded to actual pragmatic execution. And what makes it rare is that to swing wildly from strategy to tactics like that and back and forth, and to then have to deal with rejection and being wrong and confronting your own flaws on a daily basis, which I still am, requires a whole set of skills and disciplines and experiences. And it's not always just about following the rules. It's not always about just getting A's. It's not always about being first to get promoted. It's about something else. And but I think this idea of thinking like an owner, thinking through the consequences of decisions, and then owning those consequences even when you're wrong, probably is somewhere in the heart of that. And I don't know, that's just me like riffing off the top of my head. You got any thoughts,
Well, I think
Steve?
for me personally, I'm going to shift it away from founder and just to this idea of being open and curious and having a high tolerance for doing something. I mean, I left U.S. technology and joined Singapore government. So I would be an example of a high tolerance for uncertainty. So for me, it's a chance to learn, it's a chance to work with cool people, it's a chance to be curious every day. So I'm a voracious absorber of information. So I read a ton of stuff. I don't read big books, I'm not good at that, but I read tons of things, Medium and Wired and all kinds of different inputs, plus just get to meet cool people here every single day. That's why we do what we do. So let me reframe it from being a founder mindset to just being willing to try something different. And just being open to that. Who knows where it's going to lead? The answer is don't know, but I'm sure I'll learn some cool things along the way, and maybe it'll work, and maybe it won't, but if I'm smart enough and strong enough and self-confident enough, it'll be okay. I'm going to take one more. Is there anybody?
Can I
yes,
just
please,
add-
and then I'm...
Wait.
I'll
sorry,
just
Nicole.
add one more thing to that. I feel, and maybe this is just me and my style, as a leader, I feel a strong responsibility to actually drive and upskill the people that are working with me and for me, to have the courage to own their career, and my role is to enable them. And if that means that they're with me in Deloitte for a short amount of time or for a long time, when they join, every single person that joins my team, there's clear understanding. This might be short term, this might be forever. My commitment to you is to develop your tool belt, to help unlock your potential, to make you bigger and better for whatever is next, whether that's with Deloitte, whether it's not. And I will be your #1 supporter. So I think we also need to reframe our our expectations and move our head away from, I've got to hold on to this person, to being, my responsibility is to grow and unlock this individual's potential. So it's playing a bigger role even beyond the immediate organisation.
Go ahead. But do me a favor and just go straight to whatever it is you'd like to ask, because I do want to try and...
Two things. One is to propose a different angle to see this, because we've been talking about speed and things getting faster, but I believe the acceleration we're talking about is not linear acceleration. It's rotational acceleration, because of the change of the speed of the change of direction puts a lot of G-force stress, psycho and socially, on the average worker. So my second question, my question actually basically is this. We've been talking about skills, functions, relearning, upskilling, and these are basically, if I may say, edicts from the top down. But how do we actually feel, rather than how do we think about all these changes and about the future of work?
What an amazing, thank you for that question. That's really fantastic. And I think my view is we kind of know, well, there's a couple things we can see. One is we feel something because it's an early morning breakfast the day after a national holiday and a panel about AI and the future of work like sold out an audience. So there's something here, right? And it's more than just intellectual curiosity. I would say I tend to look at the general and by the way, collective emotions are not always correct, right? Like, in fact, I think most often they tend to but I tend to look a lot at popular culture and how is this being presented and how is it resonating with us? How has it been talked about in the press? And I think we're in one of these moments where there is a tremendous amount of fear, right? It's, when I was a kid growing up, I remember loving apocalyptic stories, right? It was sort of a fantasy, right? Now it's like you can't, you've got mainstream films, right, for like my parents that are about apocalypses, right? And it's sort of this sense that we're really, and there's a lot of forces. It's not just this geometric acceleration, it's all this change. And I think there's a ton of anxiety and fear. Like, that is what's happening in the market and how we should feel about it. And I think one of the reasons I come up here and try to give a more hopeful or at least somewhat optimistic message around it, and at least an open-ended view of it, is because I think the more we get negative and fearful about it, the more we're going to actually help that reality come true in a weird way. Like, we can create our own future around this. One thing is, like, look at the difference in sci-fi. Look at the difference between, like, Star Trek, like 20 years ago Star Trek, versus, the space operas we watch today. They're much more cynical, right? There's much more no vision of the future that is positive. It's all just destruction and chaos and self-interest winning the day and then ruining everything. And I think there's another way to view it, and I think we all owe it to ourselves to at least entertain that view and try to make some of that come true, because it is still possible, right? There's a lot of good that can come out of that. This geometric acceleration can be a positive force for change around a lot of different things, but it means going past the headlines, going past the knee-jerk reactions into something else.
Yeah, I'm probably a bit biased. I did spend 8 years as a clinical geneticist as a part of my career once upon a time.
And now you're going to be a lawyer.
That's when I wasn't a software engineer. So I completely agree with your comments about coding hasn't changed.
Yeah.
I get it. So I'm possibly a little bit biased here, because if I think about medicine, I could not possibly be more excited at the edge of my seat with what this collective intelligence is enabling us to do. And I like to think about it as, I accept that it's going to be a tough gig, that there is adjustments, we need to adapt, we need to reimagine. But I believe if we can get our head around that what we can achieve with that collective intelligence creates extraordinary opportunities that we've never been able to reach before. So for me, that's what I hold on to. I hold on to, whether it's talking about at work, I'm not doing the back office tasks, I'm now up the front talking to the clients or customers, creating that impactful experience, or whether it means that I'm contributing in the community in a in a different way, or I'm working with the UN. I like to think that this collective intelligence is giving us extraordinary opportunities to make the world a better place for us, for our workplaces, for our children. So I mean, I'm perhaps a little bit nutter in my thinking, but yeah, I truly believe that it is exciting.
So let's do this. I think what we can all agree on is the pace continues to be faster and faster. Number two is there will be change, for sure. So whether we embrace it, try and ignore it, hope it doesn't happen in the near term, change is already occurring. I mean, if you take a look at Uber, Uber would be one example, Lyft, it doesn't matter. Uber, Lyft would be examples of an artificially intelligent system, if you want to try and broadly use that expression, assigning tasks to humans. Go pick up a person over here, then go over there. So the idea of a taxi dispatcher and a microphone crackling away saying, hey, Bob, you know, when's your break? So that's already evolving. And so I think if we think about this, we just need to take a little bit more personal ownership. For sure, government, for sure, corporations will all play some part. But the idea of what do I do, and that's why it's great that there's teams such as General Assembly that are there to try and make those options available to you. And Deloitte is working with corporations to help them wrestle with it. But at the end of the day, there's no running away. If you don't step out, do an assessment, here's what I know, here's what I need to know, then it's going to be a little bit tough. But it's always been tough. It's no different than when there was automation deployed in Ford factories in the early 1900s, and people that used to bang on metal sheets with hammers were then replaced by tools, and then later in the 70s and 80s with automation and robotics. I mean, you can take a look at black and white pictures and go over 100 years and see almost no human beings in the later stages. And Detroit hurt, for sure. Eventually companies went bust. So we have to confront this. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm saying take ownership and do what you can do. Part of the value of these is the networking. So what I'm going to do is, although I have other questions on Slido and other hands, I'll just beg your forgiveness and say let's instead say thanks to Jake and Nicole, and let's spend time together. Thanks.